Hello, Lalot Arcadio Rivera for Catnocturnal, and this is a continuation of the tutorials for the ethical frameworks, and we are now on the Contractarian ethics. First, the principle behind the Contractarian ethics is that of a social contract. This philosophy comes specifically from Thomas Hobbes and the Frenchman Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who stressed on the state of nature, take note of this, as the only adequate starting point for the development of social and political life. Number 2, the state of nature, what is it? Is a situation as it really is. So it's like natural law that is based on the way things are of nature. But the state of nature is the human situation as it is, as it actually is. Before any rule or law from a civil government is ever established or would in effect distort the situation. So the state of nature is that condition when there is nothing, no form of government as yet. So for example, the divine right of kings as a monarch that is established by God, and all others are to be subservient to it. Thomas Hobbes questions this because this is not the human situation in its state of nature. So that is an example of what is not a situation that is not in the state of nature. The state of nature is governed, however, by natural law. And the natural law is that which legislates freedom, equality, and inherent rights of all. So just take note of these three. Okay. In the state of nature, everyone is supposed to enjoy the freedom, equality, and inherent rights of everyone. Number 3, the work of Hobbes that can be referred to on the state of nature are entitled Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and another, The Second Treatise of Government. Next, the state of nature is only theoretical. Why? Because we cannot live in such a state for so long. Because there are 3 reasons. Take note. Number 1, because there is a tendency of man to not apply the state of nature that gives freedom, equality, and inherent rights. Why? Because naturally man has a natural inclination to be selfish. Another reason, there is no way of arbitrating or judging the differences that arise from that state. Of course, if there is no existing government, then there is no way to settle with the differences because there is no, number 3, which leads to number 3 reason, there is no authority to meaningfully enforce it. So, because of these three tendencies, man is likely to recourse to the society, and he has to get help from the society, because if each one were just given would be given the chance to live in a state of nature, then everyone would just have the tendency to be selfish. Everyone will just there will be no authority to arbitrate or judge the differences. So what is the solution? Man is likely to recourse to the society, and he enters into a social contract. Number 5, a social contract is an agreement between members of a society, and according to such agreement, each one will forfeit certain rights and privileges just in order to preserve others. So in other words, each one will have to give up something for the greater whole. So it becomes now to one's advantage that he must submit himself to the government, and he must obey the laws, thereby preserving his freedom and his rights. So now, man or the individual becomes a contractor. He enters into this contract of forfeiting certain rights and privileges for the greater whole. It is now to one's benefit to participate in this agreement, most especially if the participation is direct. If this direct, it means that you are the government official, okay, and you make the laws, or indirect as you are being represented in such democratic government. So, since man now recourses to society and he enters into social contract and he divests of his own rights and as an act of participation for the common good, he forfeits certain amount of freedom and rights for the preservation of the rights of all. So number 6, the order of state of nature and social contract as a whole is considered to be logical than historical. So what does this mean? By not historical, it means that the order, the state of nature or social contract may not be referred to as happening in the past or as to not have happened at all. Rather, it is something that is of necessity or unnecessary way by which we exist. Human nature exists. The state of nature does not happen only once or only in the past, but it is present for as long as one participates in that system of a social contract and he gives his tacit consent. So what is a tacit consent? It is the consent to and the support of social organizations and regulations by virtue of an individual's continued participation in them. So take note of the key term. It is a continuing participation. So he always enters into it even without his signature because he already gives his tacit consent. Number 8, if Hobbes says of the state of nature, the contemporary American philosopher John Rawls talks of the idea of the original position. So take note, Hobbes says of the state of nature as that condition or situation, human situation where there is no government as yet. The American philosopher John Rawls also has what he calls as the original position. The original position is considered a hypothetical or imaginary situation. In the original position, we imagine ourselves stripped off from any vested interest or anything that may prejudice us to favor a principle over another. Okay, so this is a way to achieve a climate of objectivity. So for John Rawls, he calls this the original position, when we have to forget that we have, if there is any vested interest that may prejudice us or that may influence us to favor a principle over another, or to be biased or impartial, or to be partial, I mean. So number 9, with the idea of original position comes along Rawls' idea of the veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance is that which will cover one's vested interest in order to achieve fairness in matters of losing or gaining shares. So, if we find ourselves coming up with decisions or choices that will make us favor a principle over another, then we have to wear this veil of ignorance, because this is that which will make us forget that we have vested interest over something, and we have to do this in order to achieve objectivity. One then is to imagine oneself in the original position and with the veil of ignorance. Okay, and out of this, we consider everyone equal in the same boat. Because of this veil of ignorance, which covers all of one's personal interest, so one will no longer be a party to a principle that will win him favors more than the fair share for all. So this is now the basis of the principle of justice. John Rawls, as a social contractor, so he's an example of philosopher that is proponent of a social contract. He presents his concept of justice in his work entitled A Theory of Justice. So for Rawls, I read, the guiding idea is that the principles of justice for the basic structure of society are the object of original agreement. So whenever Rawls talks about the original position, and the original position consists of acknowledging the principle of justice. They are the principles that free and rational persons concerned to further their own interest would accept in an initial position of equality as defining the fundamental terms of their association. These principles are to regulate all further agreements, and they specify the kinds of social cooperation that can be entered into and the forms of government that can be established. This way of regarding the principles of justice I shall call justice as fairness. So this is what Rawls Rawls's principle of justice. So what does Rawls say of justice? This is his definition of justice. Justice is the first virtue of social systems as truth is of systems of thought. So for Rawls, any social and political act or any social system that is involved, the first concern should be justice. And he specifies here that with justice, the principle of justice, one has to wear a veil of ignorance, and he has one also, or a person also has to carry that original position where one approaches opportunities and principles with objectivity. Number 12, for Rawls, there are two principles of justice. The first principle is called the principle of equal basic liberty for all. The second principle is called the difference principle. The first principle, the principle of equal basic liberty for all, is Rawls's libertarian ideal. What is a libertarian ideal? The libertarian ideal emphasizes that personal liberty, meaning the individual liberty or freedom, is considered to be the highest social ideal. So it is about individual freedoms and rights, and it is directed to the social structure that establishes such liberties. So for Rawls, the first principle states that each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive basic liberty compatible with a similar liberty for others. So the emphasis in the first principle is the pursuit of personal liberty, and that each one should have equal opportunity to achieve this or to acquire that liberty. The second The second principle is called the difference principle, and it is directed to the economic facts of social life, meaning that this now involves the distribution of goods and what we call as equitable distribution. This is the egalitarian ideal of Rawls's principle of justice. And what is egalitarian ideal? This involves achieving equitable distribution of goods. But what makes this specifically Rawlsian principle? For Rawls, this at the same time allows that there is an unequitable distribution. So if an equitable distribution cannot be had, or it it cannot be achieved, then there is some unequitable distribution that is allowed. Some amount of unequitable distribution is allowed, but there must be a reasonable cause for this. So for Rawls, social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both A, reasonably expected to be to everyone's advantage, and B, attached to positions and offices open to all. So what does that mean? First, in the first principle of justice, which is the principle of equal basic liberty for all, this involves the libertarian ideal, which emphasizes the individual, the pursuit of personal liberties or freedoms and rights. So everyone should have an equal opportunity of engaging, for example, in trade or in business. Each person has an equal right to this basic freedom that is compatible with a similar liberty for others. The second principle, called the difference principle, is that in achieving an equitable distribution of goods, sometimes it is allowed that there will be some kind of non-equitable distribution, meaning not necessarily everything would be equal. So if there is an unequitable distribution that is involved, it must happen only for a very good reason. And that reason should be that it will be to the advantage of everyone, and that everyone will be able to have access and will have or should be able to enjoy the benefit or the result of this unequitable distribution. So next, number 15. So Rawls' general conception of justice is that all social values are to be distributed equally unless an unequal distribution of any or all of these values is to everyone's advantage.